Hey everybody, welcome to the Better Student Ministry Podcast. My name is Jared Berry.
And my name's Mark Freeman, and together we have over 30 years of youth ministry experience.
We created this resource to be of value to you and your youth ministry team. Hopefully you enjoy it, you benefit from it. Our goal is to invest in you as youth leaders so that you can invest in your students.
If you found this useful, please like and share with as many people as possible so that we can see better student ministries.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Better Student Ministry Podcast. My name's Jared.
And my name's Mark.
So glad to be back with you guys. This is kind of our season 3 kickoff.
Which everyone knows the third season of anything is
the best
season.
Yeah.
For sure.
Except for when it comes to like some TV shows.
And movies, trilogy movies.
Those are often the worst.
Yeah.
But that's not going to be the case with this podcast.
But for podcasts, it's always the best.
Yeah. We've worked out the kinks. First 2 season listeners, we apologize.
Yeah, we gave some really poor advice.
Really bad advice. But this year, we're back. And we should say one of the things that we're excited about this year, there's been a big trend across the country, and I think it makes a lot of sense, of really a focus on next-gen ministry.
Yeah. And
so understanding that, hey, there's a lot of people who are working with, whether it's kids, teenagers, college students, and in many ways we're very connected. We're on the same team.
Yeah.
We're fighting for the same thing, and I think it's a kind of a more holistic approach.
No, it's great, yeah.
And so we kind of wanted to emulate that with the podcast and say, the name is Better Student Ministry, which of course is not just about youth ministry.
Sure.
Although that's been our focus in the past 2 seasons. So this one of the things this season we're going to really hit on is a variety of topics all about next-gen ministry.
Yeah,
so
it's good.
We're kind of excited about that.
I think as we were having the conversation, we realized so many, yes, they each have unique stages of life, but so many of the principles apply across the board. And maybe you only serve in one particular area of ministry in next-gen ministries. Understanding what's happening in kids ministries if you're a youth minister and what's happening in young adults ministries or wherever you fall in the gamut helps you create an overall discipleship process for the students that happen to be in your church, right? Or whatever organization that you're helping with. So I think it's useful information, even if we've got, if you're a youth person or a young adults person and we're talking stuff specific to kids ministries, I think it's all super helpful and will make better, well-rounded adult leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. And so many leaders in our churches and youth groups are doing kids and youth or youth and college or young adult. And so we're excited about that. So this season you're going to see us, we're going to be interviewing guests.
Yep.
We're going to have some podcast episodes that are maybe specific to kids ministry or college ministry or youth ministry. But as you said, I think hopefully they'll all be beneficial and applicable. And so we're excited about that.
Awesome.
Today, man, I'm excited to dive into our topic today. I think it's really, as I've been kind of wrestling through and thinking about this for, I don't know, maybe the past 6 months to a year, I've really been, there's this idea and this concept, and that's what we're going to talk about today, I can't shake it. And the more that I think through it, the more that I wrestle through it, it feels like this is the most important thing for a youth ministry to have in today's culture with today's teenagers. And so that's what we want to talk about today is what is the most important thing for youth ministries to have today? And of course, that's maybe a little bit of it's a little bit of a clickbaity title because at the end of the day, the truth is, of course, it's Jesus, right?
Yeah.
But that's a given. We know that. We're talking about specifically like what does our focus need to be on?
Yeah.
What do we need to hit on it? So today we want to talk about that. And the answer, we'll spoil it at the beginning, the answer lies in community.
Yeah, yeah. If you think about it, obviously any age group ministry needs to have Christ at the focus. What you're suggesting, and I would agree with you, is the vehicle by which that transformational relationship is delivered is in relationship, which is in community, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and so we want to dive into that a little bit. And I think looking back, you and I both done youth ministry for a long time.
Yeah.
Some
would say too long. We overstayed.
Yes, many have said. When we were in youth ministry or doing youth ministry to start off, to be honest with you, to gather students together was kind of easy.
Yeah.
If you offered food or if you did anything fun on a Friday night or something, they would come.
Yeah. There wasn't as much going on, or at least they were not aware of as much going on.
No. I mean, when we first started youth ministry, there was no social media.
Yeah.
I think MySpace just kind of started.
Yeah.
So again, this is to, and
You really dated us.
we
there.
really did. Certainly when you and I were in youth ministry, there was
Yeah.
none of that.
Right. If
You
I
know,
wanted to see my friends, I had to go somewhere physically to see them.
Right, exactly. And there wasn't as much, even schedules were different when you think about things like sports and activities.
Yeah.
I mean, they were far less of what they are now.
Sure.
Now it's a 7-day a week. It's the pressure for people to go, you've got to be all in no
Yeah.
matter what so that your kid can have a chance to become the next LeBron James,
Sure.
even though we all know they won't, right?
Yeah.
Like that stuff has all ramped up and
Yeah.
up and up, which
And depending on the community that you live in, I know for our youth group, kids were from lots of different school districts, so they weren't even seeing each other at school necessarily. Some of their youth group friends, they were only getting a chance
Right.
to see when they were at church.
yeah. So what I've been thinking through and realizing is that discipleship, which is what we've talked about so much on this podcast, how do
Yeah.
we disciple teenagers? And
Yeah.
at the end of the day, like that's how we help them know Jesus, happens by adults who love Christ spending time with students and showing them who Jesus is. Like
Yeah.
at the most basic core, that's what youth ministry is. That's what
Correct.
discipleship is. The only way to do that is to have time where students are with adults and
Right.
with each other.
Yeah.
You have to have a sense of a connection point. You have to have a time where they're actually in proximity to each other in
Sure.
order to make disciples. That has become increasingly more and more difficult.
Sure.
On top of that, what we've also seen, if we're going to assess kind of what teenagers are like today, we know, look at any statistic, they have increasingly become more and more lonely.
Yep. More isolated.
More isolated, more addicted to technology, which has had a massive effect. I mean, some of the statistics are wild as far as you can basically trace the number of hours students spend on social media
Yeah.
is directly linked to the likelihood they are to be depressed.
Sure. Even some of the research shows they've never been more connected than ever, but they've never felt more lonely, right? Because it obviously, as we probably will flesh out here a little bit later, it's not the same type of relationship. It's not the same connection.
Right.
Yeah.
And to make things worse, we're really starting off with the negatives here.
Yeah.
To make things worse, the level of social awkwardness because of the devices. So the skill of students to be able to socially interact.
Sure.
And simple things like make eye contact,
Yeah.
have a conversation. The anxiety that many of them feel as to going into
Sure.
a new environment.
Yeah.
All of those things have also ramped up.
Yeah. And I come from an elementary education background. I was a public school teacher for almost a decade before getting into youth ministry. What has changed academically at the elementary level for our kids ministries people, what kindergarten looks like today, what first and second grade look like today, it is nothing about what it used to look like a generation ago. Like so much of kindergarten when I was teaching it was teaching relational interaction. It was teaching like social studies was, what does a healthy classroom look like? How do we interact with our friends? How do we interact with our peers? Now there's such a pressure academically that kindergarten is the new first grade, if you will. Or it's like we got to get right into, okay, we're going to learn how listen, I'm not saying academics aren't important, but I think we're starting to see some of the side effects of we haven't really taught, and now there's less opportunities. We haven't really showed people how to be in relationship with each other.
Right. Yeah.
COVID definitely didn't help that.
Nope.
Yeah.
Nope. And I think we don't even still know the long-term effects of what a couple of years of wearing masks and not being in social settings and what that does to particularly formative years for
crucial developmental years.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So all that to say is we have a real challenge on our hands because we have a generation of teenagers who are less likely to want to be together and come together, but are far more desperate to do that.
Yeah. Do you think, and maybe we'll get to this a little bit later, so if I'm asking this question too early, let me know. Do you think I can remember a pendulum swinging in my years of youth ministry where I think everything initially started with community kind of as the focus. It's like, we're just getting people together, right? And then we're like, wait a minute, we need something so much more than just getting together. And so we're like, all right, we got to really push we got to teach the Bible. And again, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but we became so focused on content delivery because we realized we're just hanging out together. We're not being intentional with our time, that I wonder if we kind of shelved the importance of community for a while also in a desire to increase biblical fluency and to increase, which are all good things, but we forgot how important those things are to work together.
Yeah, no, I think you're probably right, and maybe a misunderstanding that
Because we don't want attractional youth ministries or ministries,
Right.
and we don't want event-based ministries. We want
Right.
and so I think we kind of threw the baby out with the
Yeah.
bathwater a little bit.
And I do think it's important though to make a distinction. An event-based youth ministry does not mean they have community.
Right.
Those are very different things.
Sure.
So I can, as a youth, I remember as a youth pastor, we could spend some money and throw a big event and draw a crowd.
Yeah.
But that didn't mean we had community, right? Like the kid that comes out for free pizza and an iPad giveaway, and it doesn't mean that they're actually have a deep sense of community.
Sure.
So those are it's important distinction that you make.
Yeah.
Which events can help lead to community,
Right.
but just because you have a lot of events does not mean you have community.
Good. Yeah.
And so, but yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think there's a lot of factors that
Sure.
have gone into it. But at the end of the day, what we're seeing is a desperate need for students to feel a real sense of community.
Yeah.
And the great thing is, like, that could be discouraging and all the negatives that we mentioned and how difficult it is. But one of the wins and one of the most exciting things for me is when you read the Bible and when you read the New Testament in particular and the instruction for what the church is supposed to be, what you realize is, oh, we have the solution.
Yeah. Yeah.
If we actually just do what the Lord is telling us to do
Sure.
and operate and live, we have the very thing that people need.
Yeah, yeah, and because this isn't just based on our opinions. Like this is based on how Christ discipled the disciples, right? It's how they lived life together and shared life together.
Absolutely, yeah. When you look at the Acts church, right, this is how they lived their lives. This community was at the center of it, and so. I think that's encouraging, which is we have the thing that the world needs and wants, even if they don't realize it. The problem is, I feel like most churches and most youth groups aren't actually doing this well.
Right. Because as you mentioned earlier, and as we'll expound upon here, just because you're gathering together does not mean that healthy community is being developed.
Yeah. I think if you if you talk to a lot, obviously this is a generalization, but if you talk to a lot of people, adults that attend church every week, week in and week out, there could be people that attend church for 10, 15, 20 years, right?
Yeah.
And they're Christians, they're faithful, they're like, yeah, this is a part of my life. But if you said, do you have deep, meaningful friendships at your church? They would say no.
Yeah.
There's still, people that have been to church for years and they're still lonely.
Yeah.
They still don't feel like they have a social center. And the same thing, of course, is true for teenagers. Now, it's a little different because teenagers are not going to attend a youth group for 10, 15, 20 years, right?
Which actually makes it even harder, right? You've got them for a shorter timeline.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, and one of the other challenges that we forgot to mention is it used to be back in the day, parents would make their kids go to youth group.
Oh, right, yeah.
That doesn't happen anymore.
No, yeah.
So at least you would get those kids that would have to they'd be dragged in kicking and screaming, right? So I think the same thing is true for teenagers.
Yeah.
And for me, here's what I think the solution is, or at least the goal that we have to have in mind. And this, I would say this is true for churches, for adults, but also for teenagers and young adult ministries, is this. The youth groups that are the most successful are the ones where for those teenagers, that is the social center of their lives, their youth ministry.
Yeah. So
for the kids that are part of it, the kids that are bought in, if you said to a teenager, like, I think about it like an orbit, right? You're orbiting around. It's like, what's the center mass that you're orbiting around socially? And for a lot of kids, it's their sports teams. They're like, I'm a soccer player. Like, this is my. Yep. For some of them, maybe it's their school. They're like, I've got these friends at school. For some of them, they're like, I'm a drama kid. Or I'm a band kid or whatever, right? Yeah. They kind of all find, for you, it was like, I'm a skater goth. That was kind of your.
Right.
So you all find your social kind of orbit, right? The youth ministries that are most successful are the ones where they are the social center, the social orbit for those students.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's easy to do. We're going to talk about how do we make that happen.
Yeah.
But I think if you're saying, how do we define community? What does that look like?
Sure.
I think that should be the goal that we're aiming for.
I think if we start to talk through, okay, so what are the ingredients that make that a healthy community that teenagers or kids or young adults want to gather to, I think we'll start to figure out what is it what does that community different? How is it different from all the other potential communities, which aren't bad communities?
No.
But they're obviously different, and they have different goals, and rightly so. Right?
Sure.
Yeah.
But if we're talking in this conversation, which we are, which is how do we create a thriving youth ministry? Like, what's the most important element? What I think is for the students that are part of that group, that is the center.
Yeah.
Most youth groups, I would say, maybe that's not fair, but we'll say a lot of youth groups, you have kids who come, you have students who come, but it's not the center. So maybe they show up, and today in average attendance, maybe they're there twice a month, maybe 3 times a month.
That would probably be considered very active.
Very active, right.
Yeah.
So they come in, they're there for an hour and a half. Maybe they go on the occasional trip. But in their mind, that's just something they do.
Right.
It's not this
part of who they are.
Part of who they are. It's not this social pole in their life.
Yeah.
And so we have to figure out, how do we create that in our youth ministry? How do we make it so that the students who are there, this becomes the thing that they lean on and the way that they find community?
Yeah.
Because to your point, what we all know intuitively is the other places to find community are not all bad,
right,
but they will not fulfill the way that a great youth group or a great church is, because at the center of it is the gospel.
Right.
They're not going to find that on their soccer team or their band or whatever,
Yeah, absolutely. So do you want to start talking through what are the elements of a healthy
let's
community?
Do it.
Okay. Well, maybe I'll start with the initial thought that comes to my mind is it needs to be a space that, especially from a spiritual standpoint, a safe space to wrestle with ideas, and not necessarily in the same idea that safe spaces in a lot of our public schools and stuff are. It's a place where you can come and ask hard questions and wrestle through things and flesh out what I believe, what I don't believe, why do I believe this, why don't I believe this, in an environment where you recognize some people may think very strongly or very differently than you do, but we're going to be okay with asking hard questions, and it's a place where it's a safe place to flesh some of that out. There's a need for vulnerability in that community.
Yeah. How do you think that differs from what they experience in their everyday lives?
I think most other environments that they're in, they're more likely being told what to believe, which I think can sometimes happen, certainly within a youth group, children's ministry, Christian environment, where like, no, this is what we believe, sometimes without the why behind it, because like it's thought that if you ask these questions, they're kind of out of bounds questions as it relates. We don't question these things, right? These are just the things that we believe. And I think a lot of the other communities that students are a part of, they're being told by adults, these are the rules, this is what we believe, why we, without the why we believe it, or the recognition that you might not be there yet, right?
Yeah. Well, I think too, like to your point, one of the things that happens is a great youth ministry that's providing that place to wrestle through ideas is also introducing for some of these students they're introducing the idea that you should be wrestling with the things that you're thinking through. So, and here's how that differs. And for many of them, unknowingly, they are being taken down this cultural stream where the water is kind of moving in one direction and it's pulling them down, and they don't even realize it. But the reason why they believe many of the things that they do is just because that's what culture is saying. Here's
that's what they've been told to believe, right?
Here's what we believe on this issue. And I think if you asked them, they would say, no one told me to believe that. But it's like, well, why do you believe that? And for many of them, they've never actually learned how to critically think. And as a Christian, that should be one of our top values, which is, no, we need to critically think about what we believe, including our own faith. And we want to create that space. So I think the benefit of what you're saying is that's an environment that they don't encounter really anywhere else. It's not like when they're on social media, their friends are going like, oh, that's a great thought that you give there.
Right.
You really, no, they're like, you idiot.
Yeah, that's stupid. What I mean? Why would you? Yeah.
Right, exactly. So I love that idea of creating that spot. I think one of the things that I think through too when I think about what does kind of great community look like is a place for them to explore what a sense of identity means, and at their age in life, that is at the forefront of everything for them. They are literally kind of like molding and cultivating what their identity is going to be. And so a youth ministry that brings all different teenagers together in a way that is not going to happen at their school, is not going to happen in other spots of our life. Like in other areas of our life, everything's kind of segmented. It's like, and I remember experiencing this as a teenager. It's like, okay, I'm part of the sports crowd, or I'm part of this crowd. And there's these lines and these segments, and we don't mix. And it's kind of like, oh, this is who I am. And everyone has this frustration, this deep, unhappiness about this. So many teenagers feel like I'm a fake, I'm a phony. I remember thinking, who am I? I literally don't know who I am. I'm one person in this set. Youth ministry provides a place that goes, let's all wrestle through that. Like, who are we? And I think the message of the gospel in community, where you're bringing together kids from all walks of life, you're bringing sporty kids and nerdy kids and musical kids and video gamers and the kids who don't want to talk to anybody and the kids that won't shut up. You're bringing them all together, and you're like, let's talk about identity.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the great things about community is you can't wrestle through identity in isolation.
Yeah.
It's got to be wrestled through in community. Yeah. And I think wrestled through with adults who are helpful in steering and going, well, maybe not that, but let's talk about this. And so great youth ministries allow for that process to happen.
Sure. And I think one of the things that may be also unique to a youth ministry environment versus a lot of their other communities is the significance that we've recognized of the need for one-on-one relationship, the need for small group relationships, and then the need for the larger community as well. Because I think identity is flushed out slightly differently, but all necessarily in those different environments, right? Because there's going to be times where it's just like a one-on-one conversation with an adult leader while I'm maybe being more vulnerable than I would be in the whole group community. Sure. And then there's this smaller group of guys or gals or however you break up your groups where it's like, hey, we're going to hold each other accountable in some ways here in community with each other, and as we figure out who we are and what and then there's some moments that necessitate large group like identity, like we're all in this together, I'm not alone, and all those sorts of things, which I don't know that you get as much in many of the other types of communities that are available, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. One of the other things I think why community is important and what it provides when it's done well in a youth group is it provides a level exposure to other students who are at least somewhat like-minded. And so the conversations that are had, the advice that's given, the kind of the norms that exist are different than a kid who is disengaged from a youth ministry and finds all those things in other places. So the average student who, let's say, is not going to youth ministry or not a part of it, they're still getting all those things, but where are they getting them from? They're getting them from the kids, their friends at school, their friends on the soccer team, and those people, if they're not Christian, which most of the time they're not, they don't have any sort of the shared values. They don't have any of the presuppositions that a Christian would. They don't have any of the foundations. They're coming from a completely different worldview. And so as teenagers who are in this really like wrestling through time, when they're looking for advice or wrestling through like, I don't know what to do here, imagine what sort of feedback they're getting.
Right.
Versus even in a youth group setting, you'll get horrible advice from other teenagers.
Right. Yeah.
But at least there's a shared kind of foundational principle. Even if one is not a Christian, they're aware that like this is why we're here, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a big difference in that formative years of their life.
And I would imagine too that's why some of our young adults struggle so much once they move out of that community in some ways. Like now they're being pushed into other communities that are probably very, very differently minded. So if they're not connected to their local church, if they're not connected in some way outside of, seeing the value of being part of a larger community, they'll get gobbled up and lost in a number of different spaces, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. So I think it begs, I feel like most people listening would say like, okay, yeah, community is really important.
Yep.
Number two, here's why it's important. Some of the things that we mentioned, and we could probably go on and on.
Sure.
There's a whole bunch of other reasons, right?
Yeah.
But maybe the most important question is, how do we do it?
Yeah.
How do we actually create this sense of community? Because I know right now that there's a lot of great leaders who have the best hearts, best intentions, listening to this and going, I want to, I just don't know how.
Yeah, that's good.
What do we do to create that community?
Yeah. I think the purest element in a community is genuine care for each other. So as youth leaders, as kids ministries leaders, as young adult leaders, wherever we fall in the gamut, you need to create moments to genuinely care for the other people, which means you got to get to know the other people. I'm not going to care as much about you if I don't know you. And so providing opportunities to get to know one another. I think a lot of times kids ministries, youth ministries, we're so shoulder to shoulder listening to one person at the front talking, which I do think you need in those ministries,
Sure.
that there is not intentional built-in time to get to know one another, to understand what you like and what you don't like, what you struggle with, what you wrestle with. And so I think you have to provide opportunities to get to know each other, to genuinely care for one another. One little silly practical thing that we would do, and it's kind of fun because I've been out of youth ministry for a while now, but I have a set of sixth graders who just this year are moving up into the youth ministry with our high schooler, and they did this little like mock youth group night in the transition, like get them used to what does it look like, and right from the very start, their priority was let's celebrate life together by sharing what they call good news. So at the beginning of every week, the kid introduces themselves, they say their name, which everyone gets to hear, which is also important. How many times have you walked in a room and you've seen somebody 5 or 6 times and you don't know their name? That's a big deal community-wise. And then they'll share something that they want to celebrate. This happened in my life today. And everybody's like, oh, cool. Like they get to celebrate together. And I think sometimes maybe when it starts, it feels a little phony and weird. But I found after doing it week after week after week, our students genuinely looked forward to being able to share. Because so many of these kids don't get celebrated, and it's not because they've got terrible families and bad parents, just their lives are so busy and everything is so fast paced. Right. To be able to slow down and share what good news that's happening in your life is such a big win for them.
And many of their friends are self-absorbed, so they don't really care
what's
happened in their life, right?
Yeah.
No, I like that. I feel like as I think through, okay, how do we create community? There's a couple things that come to my mind, and one of them is number one, we have to figure out how do we get students to be present and at youth ministry.
Yeah.
Which sounds simple, but it's like, what vehicle am I going to use to get them in proximity to each other and to adults?
Yeah.
And so we've got to figure that out. That's a challenge. We got to figure out how to do that, because a student who just comes on a Wednesday night sporadically is not ever going to engage in real community. So what does it look like? And there's a variety of different ways that you can do this, but I think there's some of the ones that are really well done are, number one, they're centered on mission. Mm-hmm. So I heard a saying once that they said, if you aim for community, sometimes you'll get mission, but if you aim for mission, you'll always get community.
Yeah.
And the idea is like, if you get a group of kids who all kind of have a same goal in mind of like, we got to work towards this.
Sure. Which is why athletic teams are such a generation or a binder, right?
Right. Athletic teams, military. I mean, anything like that, right? It's like we've got a shared mission that we're working towards.
Yeah.
Number one, the willingness for them to then gather more often. Yeah. So use the sports teams, for example. What do sports teams do? They have practice.
Yeah.
They're not just going on the games, right? They're practice, and those where memories are made. That's where commitment, man, we're wrestling through this. So figuring out within your youth ministry, what can I do to create a shared mission amongst students that forces them to have regular engagement with each other and the youth leader outside of the service. Yeah. Now, what I would say is, my kind of caution is, this can't just be a twice a year we go on a one-day like mission trip down to thing. Because if it's that infrequent, it's not going to create community. Yeah. I'm not saying it's not worth doing, right? Yeah. But you saying like once or twice a year we're going to go and feed the homeless with this organization, still a great thing. Yeah. But that can't be the strategy. It's got to be a strategy which built into it will help create regular, ongoing times of gathering. And the best way to do that is not just like, hey, we're doing what youth groups typically do is, hey, we're doing a guys' video game night or a pizza night. That's all great. Yeah. But once it moves into the mission realm, like we have a shared mission, that's when you really get a deeper buy-in.
I think where you see that probably most often show up too is the discrepancy between your younger students and your older students as well, like especially your juniors and seniors, who probably when they were 8th graders, 9th graders, loved the video game night, pizza night. Well, now your juniors and seniors, they've done that every year now for the last 4 or 5 years. It's lost kind of some of its glimmer. And if their mission is not, it doesn't shift over time, or you don't help them see why they're there, you'll lose them because they're so busy. They got work, they've got school stuff, academics are ratcheting up. So I remember for our juniors and seniors, if I couldn't help them think about coming on a Wednesday night, which is when we would gather, is starting to transition. It's not about you any longer. It's about serving the younger students that your group, leaving a legacy or leaving a mark on discipling some of the younger students. They'd be like, we've been there, we've done that 100 times. But if they could catch the vision for, I'm going to show up tonight to pour into these people, and in doing so, I'm going to be poured into as well. The retention was exponentially higher.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
absolutely. That makes so much sense. And so you and I are part of the Assemblies of God, and there's something in the Assemblies of God that we do called fine arts, which this is not the only way to do it. But I want to give an example of something that I've seen churches that do it well really do a great job of this. And so the idea of fine arts, right, is that you've got different categories that students could sign up for, and these are related to giftings like singing, acting. There could be drama. It could be drumming. It could be photography, music.
Yeah.
And so they would sign up for, and some of these categories are solo, but a lot of them are group categories, to participate in these categories. And the idea is that they're going to create some sort of a piece, and they're going to work towards it, making it better and better. And then we do a state-level festival where they come and kind of present their work. And we have evaluators that look at it and say, here's where you did great, here's where you need to improve. And if it's quality enough, they could advance to like a national festival where they do the same thing, but students from all over the country.
Yeah.
Right. So what I've seen some youth groups who do this really well is they leverage that. And what they do is they'll say to students, hey, what do you guys think you could do? And you could have students like, I don't know. And they'll say, well, why don't you do this drama, right? And we'll pull you in. And even if your part is minuscule and it's small, whatever. And so what ends up happening is you have these practices now where hey, let's come together. We're going to practice. We've got our drama team, and you're working towards a goal. You have a shared mission, which is we want to do well on this thing. We want to get better at it. Yeah. Of course, it's centered in Christ. But most importantly, what's happening, in my opinion, is not that the kid is becoming a better actor.
Yeah.
What's most importantly happening is that the kid is engaging in meaningful relationships with other students and the adult leader who during that time, what is happening? Discipleship. Yeah. They may not be doing a Bible study, but that's not discipleship. Discipleship is life on life. Yeah. And so they have a built-in time that they are meeting together outside of a youth group, because they also have a shared mission. Yeah. And so now a student is willing to go like, oh, I'll go over there on a Sunday afternoon, or I'll go over there on a Friday evening, or whatever. And what you see in the youth groups that really do this well is those students have the highest level of community buy-in. Yeah. That becomes the social kind of center because they're spending so much time. Sure. They have a shared mission. There's a sense of, these are my brothers and sisters. And of course, there's always drama, and there's always that stuff that comes up, but
that's part of the discipleship process as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's one example of a type of thing that you can create within your youth ministry. And maybe you don't do that, but my point is you got to do something. Yeah. You have to create something that's centered on mission and creates opportunity for discipleship to take place.
Yeah. No, that's good. And obviously we bought into that and did that for years, and that rises and falls on the adult leader. The quality of that community rises and falls on the adult leaders that are helping to navigate that, right? Because it could also very easily get off the rails and become a disaster that creates, tension in the community. Absolutely. And if the focus and the mission is off, things like that. Absolutely. But if you've got the right adults with the right mindset in there, I mean, the number of times before a practice we're like, okay, there's some relational issues, maybe not within the group, but at home or whatever. Like, we got to address this before we can even get started on practice. Right. And like, if it was not a part of our discipleship strategy, there's no way I could justify the amount of time and energy put into it.
Sure.
But seeing it as a part of our discipleship strategy made all of those extra hours worth logging for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So we got to figure that out. How do
Yeah.
we create that? How do we do that? And it doesn't have to look like that, but
Right.
But it does have to have those elements of
Yeah.
getting students around each other, spending a lot of time together, and having a shared mission for sure. So
That's good.
And the last thing I'll say about that is one of the beauties of it is it gets them off their devices.
Yeah.
It gets them off the digital space and into the real world space.
Sure.
And whether they recognize that or not, it fills a deep void and need that they have in their lives. So,
Yeah. That's good.
yeah. So any other thoughts, Mark, on how do we create community? What any kind of last kind of thoughts as someone's wrestling, going, I love to figure out how to do this.
Yeah, I think as you were talking, one of the things that I think I'm often aware of, again, is just the varying sizes of different groups and what their adult staff looks like. And we're not supposing that you need to have 30 plus students and a adult team of 10 adults for healthy community to take place. This can happen with one or two adult leaders and just a handful of students who want to gather together. Like the idea that you need this massive community for healthy community to happen isn't. So my encouragement, I guess, it would be just look at who you've got right now and have a dream for it growing. Yeah. Because I think if the community isn't growing, then then there's something to be said about what that community, it might be indications of some unhealth in the group, right? If it's not a place where your teenagers or your kids or your young adults feel comfortable bringing their outside of church friends to, use that as a metric to kind of triage the health of the group. Because in theory, you want it to be a community where they're like, my friend from school has got to be a part of this because it's so life-giving. Right. But if there's this fear of, oh my gosh, if I bring them in, they're going to see something different or they're going to see me differently, then that helps that student realize maybe I'm not the same person in these two different communities. What's wrong with that? Or what is there about this youth group or kids ministries or young adults community that I wouldn't want to invite my friend into? And Absolutely. So a group should, in theory, grow. Not that it has to grow fast, but it should have some sort of growth to it and be an environment in which people want to be a part of.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point.
Yeah.
We oftentimes will talk to students, you got to invite your friends, But listen, if they come to youth group and no one talks to them, they don't feel that it's not the center of their community, why would they invite other people into that? It's not going to be attractive in their minds to.
And I get it can be intimidating, right? I can remember there were seasons of times where we would have like a lot of guests for a season of time, and it changed the environment. And sometimes you lament that, and you're like, oh, it was so great what we had, and now it's different. But you've got to embrace that, and you got to lean into that, and then helping those students. Here's some shared mission, right? Helping those students understand. Like, if they understand what's happening in the gospel in their own hearts, then, man, they've got to open that up to anyone and everyone that wants to experience that as well.
Yeah. So, like, maybe one other thought that I have, too, about how do we create this, and these are hopefully practical tips, is, number one, if a new student comes in and the only people that greet them or talk to them are the adults, you're not going to get community.
Yeah.
You have got to figure out, and this is, again, a shared mission, you've got to figure out how to get students to engage with other students. And so the ones that are more mature, the ones that are bought in, and this is one way you can create mission, right, is to actually have, there's such a big difference when a kid walks into a youth group and a leader comes up and goes, hey, there's a sense of like, okay, this is your job.
Sure.
Versus a student going, hey, man, what's up? Do you want to come sit with us and hang out?
Yeah.
And so we've got to figure out, I think a lot of youth groups think like, oh, no, we're good. We have adults that are welcoming people. It's like, that's good.
Yeah.
But, man, that's not going to be what you ultimately need.
Yeah, I absolutely found students would return exponentially more likely if they connected with even just a student that night than even having a great relationship with the adults that were in the room, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing I would say is this is, if all you're doing in youth ministry is a once a week gathering for a service environment where students predominantly are listening to something being taught to them, you're never going to get real community that way. Your youth ministry strategy has to be formulated in such a way that does more than that. And if you're like, listen, I'm a volunteer, okay, then change it. Don't meet every week, but don't do a service every week.
Yeah.
You've got to get them out of just a large group service. There needs to be, like you said earlier, there needs to be elements of small group activities where, like, hey, these 5 7th grade boys are hanging out and having conversation, where you're giving them the opportunity to make some friendships and deepening relationships. There's got to be some stuff that's done off site. That's not just that, where it's, hey, we're going to go to this thing, or we're doing this mission trip, or we're doing this hangout. So you've got to think through strategically, how do we do more than just a once a week kind of gathering.
Yeah, absolutely. And just one final thought too, as we get ready to wrap up here, and it brought to mind when you just said about doing mission stuff together, whether it's local or there's something about that incubator of being out of your comfort zone, but we're all out of our comfort zone together, which really galvanizes relationship. Now I have to rely on your strengths and you have to rely on my strengths. So providing some awkward experiences that force us to be in relationship with each other, which is why, of course, we're big fans of local and international missions opportunities as well.
Yeah, the same thing can be said about larger events beyond just your youth group. Yeah, there's something not necessarily about the shared mission, but the memory making.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
When kids get to go to a big convention or they go to a camp or something like that, it's like they're making memories with each other that then are way more likely to have them want to hang out and spend time together.
It's creating a story, right? And they want to be a part of a story.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And with the adult leaders as well.
Right.
They're like, oh, man, remember we stayed up till 3 a.m. and you sprayed Mountain Dew out of your nose because we were all laughing. Like, those are the kind of, or the drive back and forth. Like, those are the kind of times you make those memories that when that Wednesday night comes around, you're like, I don't feel like going. They're like, but I kind of want to see everybody, so I will.
Yeah, it's good. It's good.
So our hope for you guys is, like, lean into really wrestling with your youth ministry and thinking through, how do I create community, real community, and have that as a target on your wall.
Sure. Go through, list the things that you do and see how many of them have intentional community as an element. Right. And if you don't see much of it, our recommendation is to infuse it.
And one other thing I would add is, if you're not have that level of community within your staff, adult staff, that's
a whole other episode, bro.
That's another episode. But as far as like a thermometer, like how are we? If you don't have that with your staff, it's not likely going to happen with your teenagers.
If they're just checking in the night that you gather, and you guys may say, give a head bob to each other. Yeah, 100%.
So
talk about longevity in your staff.
Yeah.
Retaining your staff. Yeah, that's a whole other episode.
We'll do another episode on that.
That's good.
So anyway, you want a great youth ministry, shoot for biblical community, surrounded by mission, and we're excited. We believe that God's going to help you guys. So thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you guys on the next episode. Peace.